radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
Indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. It's the great blizzard of 24, so it's actually kind of a fine day to be kicking back and thinking things through, which I hope you'll do anytime you hear any news stories or any political pronouncements or even commentary like I'm delivering to you today. It's essential that you really think it through and don't just take it on face value. A lot of deception out there. In fact, today we're going to be talking specifically about why we doubt the experts. Now, during the COVID lockdowns, the mandates, basically, there was a lot of narrative that needed to be managed. And it turns out corporate media was the perfect medium to help keep people in line and to decry disinformation. And no one was a more favored target of the media than Dr. Ryan Cole. Just check out this news headline from the Idaho Capital Sun. This is just a recent headline from a couple of days ago. Washington regulators restrict medical license of Idaho doctor who spread COVID-19 misinformation or disinformation. Oh boy, Dr. Ryan Cole likely knew the COVID disinformation he spread was false, state medical regulators rule. So there was an investigation that I think began in Idaho, but Idaho medical authorities were like, we don't see any point in pursuing this. Washington state medical authorities, though, did. And so they have gone after Dr. Ryan Cole for daring to question the narrative. Now, here's what the article tells us. Cole broke medical practice standards by prescribing ivermectin for COVID-19 to at least 4 patients via an instant message-based telehealth platform, the commission ruled. Cole likely knew, they can't say for sure because they're really trying to treat him like a thought criminal, that his COVID-19 claims were a misrepresentation of the true facts, the commission ruled. Another way to say this is they're saying that he was violating or misrepresenting what they promoted as true facts, which it turns out were not true. Now, one of the questions that comes to mind here is the patients that Dr. Cole prescribed ivermectin to, were they harmed? Was there any kind of medical malpractice or malfeasance that took place in prescribing that? And the reason I ask this is because there are a lot of us, myself included, who were able to access ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and other non-ventilator, non-vaccine-based or non-remdesivir type treatments when we thought we may have COVID. And we're fine. In fact, I know it's anecdotal, but I'll tell you, from my own experience, when I had symptoms that were consistent with COVID, I wasn't going to go get tested, but I started on ivermectin, and within 24 hours, probably felt about a 90% improvement and lessening of the symptoms. Now, that's just one person's experience, but my point is, in no way was Dr. Cole out there harming people and promoting snake oil to them. But the medical establishment was extremely threatened by his pushing back against their narrative, and you're going to see why that is here in just a few moments. So let's go back to the story. This decision by the Washington Medical Commission restricts Cole for 5 years from practicing primary care medicine. In other words, he can still perform as a pathologist, but he can't prescribe medications for patients in Washington and practice primary care medicine. Cole's medical practice now is limited to the practice of pathology. Boy, they're really teaching him, but no, they're going to take it even one step further. Look at this. The commission ordered Cole to submit an essay, at least 1,000 words long, about professionalism, truthfulness, and honesty in medicine. They might as well have had him write this on a blackboard or a whiteboard for that matter. The paper should, the commission says, explain how Cole would apply what he'd learned in his medical practice. Cole should be prepared to discuss the paper's content with the commission, the ruling said. They also ordered $5,000 in fines. Not complying with the order could mean Cole's license would be suspended or revoked, the commission warned. This is a medical struggle session that they're calling him to, and they're treating him like some school child. Well, you're going to write an essay about why we don't speak up in class and why we always raise our hands, and then we're going to evaluate whether or not you get a passing grade. And it's kind of the same thing that Jordan Peterson is facing with the Board of Psychology in Canada, where he has spoken out and taken some positions that are contrary to what the science is demanding. And so they're holding his license over his head. And it's the same thing with Washington State. Now, I know the news media has been very eager to find any reason to point out, well, see, Dr. Cole is a dangerous man. but it's because he's a thought criminal. It's not because he is doing harm to patients. It's because he is challenging a narrative by which a lot of people not only enriched themselves, but also seized power and exercised incredible control over the populace. And we're talking unelected people, health directors and so forth that had incredible amounts of power and influenced those who even were duly elected. So I feel for Dr. Cole, but I don't think that he is quite the criminal that they made him out to be. Now, here's a tweet from the Idaho Capital Sun. Cole's false statements are harmful and dangerous to individual patients, generate mistrust in the medical profession. Oh my, where are my pearls? I need to clutch them. And in public health as well, and have widespread negative impact on the health and well-being of our communities, the commission said. That sounds like a group of people who got called out on lies and are now trying to cover themselves. Well, we'll make an example of him. No one will dare stand up to us. Let's see what the Idaho Statesman has to say, though. I think they took it even one step further here. If Washington recognizes Dr. Ryan Cole for what he is, why can't Idaho? In other words, they'd like to see Idaho threaten him as well. But again, it comes back to this man is a thought criminal to them. He is thinking and sharing unapproved thoughts. And it's important that they silence him. Otherwise, people may lose trust in the experts. Well, why would we ever lose trust in the experts? I mean, come on. Why not? Okay, on second thought, what's this? This is from the New York Post just this week. Fouchy admits to Congress that certain COVID social distancing guidelines lacked scientific basis. Now, I don't know if you saw any of his testimony or have read any of the stories about him testifying before this congressional committee. It's incredible that this man is able to find his way, out of his bedroom in the morning or to remember how to put his shoes on, because he could not recall almost everything that he was asked. I do not recall. He got a $5 million advance on his memoirs. And I'm wondering, how does that happen when you cannot recall anything that you said or did because he's, covering his behind? This is from the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus. Dr. Fauci claimed the 6 feet apart social distancing recommendation promoted by federal health officials was likely not based on any data. It just sort of appeared. But let's back that up with some more testimony here. This is a statement, a declaration from Greg Gonsalves, who talks about as an epidemiologist at the Yale School of Medicine and School of Public Health. These are his credentials. And he talks about the data coming from China indicating that the average infected person passes the virus on to 2 or 3 other people at distances of 3 to 6 feet. What was the source? Let's look at the footnote. I know it's hard to see down there, but the source is, it's a New York Times article. Is that a peer-reviewed medical journal? No. It's someone citing a New York Times article as a reason for why we have to approach this distancing. By the way, how did that distancing work? For that matter, how did the vaccine work? Remember, July of 2021, when President Biden was talking about this is an epidemic of the unvaccinated. And he was talking about people's patience running out with the unvaccinated. It's a pandemic of the unvaccinated. And yet everybody still got COVID, which is what really puts the lie to this claim that all these lockdown procedures and distancing and so forth, the masks, none of it was necessary. It was all a grab for power. And thank heavens there were individuals like Dr. Ryan Cole who spoke out at some risk, which to me means, you should at least consider what the guy has to say. It's not like he's just, skating like Dr. Fauci with no consequences whatsoever. Dr. Fauci became fabulously rich for having made the right investments at the right time, to just make bank off of the vaccines. Dr. Cole, on the other hand, is facing the loss of his license in Washington state and, of course, having his name dragged through the mud by a compliant media that is only too eager to try to enforce the narrative and make sure that nobody thinks outside the boundaries of approved opinion. Pretty sickening stuff. I love this observation by Kevin Bass. Now, he was a medical student. I believe he was just kicked out of medical school because he, too, has been questioning the narrative. And he says, I hear this all the time. Everyone was just trying to do their best during the pandemic, which is why they censored everyone who disagreed with their policies and had different ideas about what we should do, because silencing other people's ideas is how one does one's best. He's got a point. Science is not about, we only have one way of looking at it, and there's just one way only. In fact, I'm going to turn to the great Paul Rosenberg to talk a little bit about how science works. And this is just very simple, basic, but I think it's dead on accurate how he describes it. Science is a process. It's not a database of approved knowledge, and it's certainly not pronouncements from on high. Science is a careful process of finding errors and by it defining durable, reusable facts. And when a well-defined idea passes through this process without being shown false, we accept it as a valid theory, even though it will remain open to revision and even rejection. Which raises the question, okay, so why was Dr. Fauci referring to himself as the science? Why were so many news organizations and politicians leaning on the science says you have to do this? Paul Rosenberg has the answer here. He says it's horrifying to see the supposed arbiters of science attacking whatever fails to obey them. They are laboring to bully and to secure obedience by the application of social pain. And by so doing, these scientists, not all scientists, have joined a long chain of intellectuals trying to secure a legally privileged position. That's it. Bingo. I don't think it could be explained any better than that. But these are among the reasons why we have to doubt these experts. And of course, it doesn't help that people in power, and I'm talking elected and unelected officials, people in authority, have been, they've been facing a crisis of legitimacy because people have noticed some of the things we were told as certain and facts didn't turn out to be factual after all. This is how the Mises organization, I believe it's Connor O'Keefe, writing about how the establishment is unmasking itself, says, in the United States, the political establishment has for many years evoked democracy to legitimize its actions in the eyes of the public. Doing so transforms any action they take into an embodiment of the people's will and any opposition into a selfish denial of everyone else's wishes. But the internet allowed the public to see that many of the views and beliefs that had long been presented as fringe were in fact popular, even more popular than so-called mainstream ideas. I'll give you a perfect example of what this looks like. Check out this map. This is showing where gender dysphoria diagnoses are rising nationwide. The darker the color, the more the percentage of gender dysphoria diagnoses. This is between 2018 to 2022. Look at that. Look at Utah. Holy cow, what is going on there? And if you're wondering, well, maybe there's some explanation. Maybe we just finally took the blinders off. No, Ryan Spoon nails it when he says this is literally social contagion. Young, naive, impressionable children are being indoctrinated to believe they are the wrong gender. Then they're brainwashed into being chemically sterilized and surgically mutilated, becoming lifelong big pharma and big medicine victims. Now, of course, the state of Idaho took steps to address this and to prevent this kind of abuse. And of course, the pushback has been furious and continues to this day, led by many people within the media who say, well, this is just a terrible thing to do. And how dare they, get in the way of these kids and their parents and their doctors making these medical decisions? Well, I'll tell you why, because it's not a fringe idea. Normal people understand there is a certain amount of confusion that young people face growing up, figuring out who you are. And to prey on them and to play upon their confusion and to try to seduce them into questioning their gender and making permanent alterations either to their physical chemistry or even to their body, through surgical mutilation is unconscionable. But anyone who says that is considered, well, you're the extremist. That's such an extreme way to look at things. It's just not the case. And it's time that people note, this is what extremism looks like, by the way. Here's a strong supporter of abortion in northern Idaho. Abort Scott Herndon. Support women, abort Scott Herndon. Now, I know some people are saying, look, that's an out-and-out death threat. And I was inclined to say, no, you might be overreacting. But then again, I think, what does abortion represent? It represents the termination or ending of a life. If not so, you wouldn't have to kill it if it wasn't a living thing. But this is the kind of extremism where hate has no place in our great state, right? Right? Those Idaho leaders who want to step up and tell us, how we should all be nice to each other. Stop Idaho Rhinos comes right out and calls them out. Here we see real extremism in Idaho, unlike the crap that Idaho Leaders United and Take Back Idaho claim there is on the far right. This is what real extreme kind of thinking leads to. Looking at you too, Mary Souza, who, by the way, she is really upset because people have been calling her out for standing there pointing her finger and chanting, extremist, extremist, extremist. Just understand, the more they say it, the more we understand why nobody takes these groups, their vendors, or Mary seriously. Now, this brings us to our final subject, and that is, let's talk a little bit about, actually, before I get to that one, this is one more example. This is KTVB. Former King County firefighter who refused vaccine mandate. See, he's a bad person because he didn't buy into the narrative, charged in January 6th riot. Look, I don't know what this guy did or didn't do, but isn't that interesting that KTVB thought it was important that we throw in that he refused the vaccine mandate and therefore he's probably a terrible person. He's a denier of some kind, a science denier, anti-vaxxer. I'm sure they have something. So I wanted to share with you a couple of excerpts from Brian Parson's excellent article from withdrawconsent.org on the deceit of open primaries. See, I happen to think that what we're looking at in terms of, what's called extreme, but is actually very mainstream, normal thought, people wanting fiscal responsibility on the part of their politicians, wanting to keep more of their own money instead of having it all taxed away from them, wanting to be free from government coercion and instruction and manipulation at every turn of their life. In other words, valuing their freedom, wanting to exercise their conscience, think the thoughts they want to think, speak the speech that they want to speak without being policed at every turn, by either tone policing or people, accusing them of being extreme. I believe that's the majority of people. But there's a small minority that is very determined that we've got to get control of power, political power in Idaho. And they believe the way to do that is through open primaries and ranked choice voting. So I wanted to share with you Brian Parson's thoughts on the deceit of open primaries. This is a great explanation. He says at the core of political parties is the idea of voluntary association. Now, if you're not familiar with that, let me just put it this way. That means you are free to choose who you wish to hang out with as well as who you do not wish to hang out with. But that's discrimination. Yes, it is. And it's a natural right. And we all exercise it, whether you believe that or not. Voluntary association means that as a free people, we have the right to associate with others based on any number of commonalities, whether they be religious, ideological, social, or economic factors. We associate with people where we find common ground. In conservative America, this often means churches. In progressive America, it could mean trade or labor unions. Regarding political associations, benefit arises when we seek to implement shared ideas in our communities. So by voluntarily associating with a political party, we proclaim our shared belief in the party's tenets. Both the Republican and Democrat parties publish core beliefs in a party platform. Third parties, such as the Libertarian, Constitution, and Green parties, also publish party platforms. In total, at least 53 political parties are operating in American politics. Now, Brian says because of the stark contrast in belief systems between conservatives and progressives, the Idaho Republican Party has made every effort to require some commonality in beliefs so that Republican voters can be assured that the Republican label will only be used to promote mutually agreed upon conservative policy. This is why in 2011, the Idaho legislature enacted legislation that leaves the option of closed or open primaries to the voting party. The Idaho Democrat Party, desperate for votes, elected to open their primary. The Republican Party, wishing to narrow their numbers down to mutual belief, closed their primary. This does not exclude voters from the political process, as anyone can register as a Republican. It merely asks that voters voluntarily affiliate before participating in party politics. Now, he says in the past year, a progressive activist group calling themselves Reclaim Idaho has invested substantial funds and labor into a ballot referendum to change Idaho's electoral system so that they may participate in Republican Party politics without first registering as a Republican. For some time now, progressives have been changing their party affiliation every couple of years to nominate the most progressive Republicans they can identify. Between the election of 2020 and the midterm election of 2022, 58,000 unaffiliated voters dropped off the rolls of the Secretary of State, while 46,000 new Republicans registered. In a state where elections are often determined by mere thousands of votes, this provides an opportunity for deceitfully manipulating the political landscape of Idaho. He says because the Democrat Party, the Idaho Democrat Party, has an open primary and the Republicans have a closed primary, the only possible explanation for progressive attempts to force Idaho's primaries open is that they wish to have undue influence in party politics where they don't share party values. But he says, do not be fooled, Idaho. The progressive expansionism of Portland and Seattle is knocking at our door, and it's up to us to send them packing. Send them packing? Why, that's not very inclusive. Well, if their goal is to subvert the values that members of the Republican Party wish to promote, then maybe they don't belong there. I still think the analogy of, yes, let's let the opposing team choose our starting lineup is a pretty valid one. Nevertheless, keep your eyes open. The pressure is going to be turned up. There's going to be a lot of smoke. There's going to be a lot of fog. There's going to be a lot of distortion throughout this coming year on matters such as open primaries and ranked choice voting. Pay close attention, too, to who is tracking the performance of your legislators and whether or not they are adhering to the principles of limited government or whether they just want a blank check to do whatever they please. There's a lot of folks who are spending a lot of other people's money and patting themselves on the back for what a great job they're doing. But are they really doing you or your children or your children's children a favor? We'll talk more about that next week. Thanks again for joining us. This is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.